Luis Bunuel was an inspirational director during the time of the Spanish Civil War. Luis Bunuel was born in Hernandez, Spain on February 22, 1900. He was born into a rich family and was the child of Leonardo Bunuel and Maria Portoles.
If you were to ask Luis about his childhood, he would describe it as having slipped by in an almost medieval atmosphere. Between the ages of 6 and 15, he went to a very strict Jesuit school, which only began to spark his rebellion against religion and the Catholic Church.
Luis then went to a private high school called the Colegio del Salvador, but he left the school when he was 16 because of the cruel treatment he faced from one of the teachers. He instead studied and graduated at a public school. He then went to the University of Madrid and became involved in politics and literary peñas, or clubs that had meeting in the city's cafes. He was friends with many famous artists and writers that included Salvador Dalí, Federico Garcia Lorca, and Rafael Alberti. He then worked as an agricultural engineer, but hated that job. He quit it and then left Madrid for Paris. When he arrived at Paris, he could not decide what to do for a career. But in 1921, Luis realized what he wanted to do after watching the movie Destiny by Fritz Lang.
He then approached the renowned French director Jean Epstein. From him, he had begun learning filming techniques and was hired as an assistant. But he was then fired when he refused to work under Jean's mentors, whose movies Luis did not like. His first movie made in France was done with the help of his mother financing him and with the collaboration of Salvador Dalí. It was called Un Chien Andalou. This 16-minute short film was created to criticize the bourgeoisie and the avant-garde, or the advance guard. His second movie he made in France was called L'Âge d'Or. This movie was created in order to criticize the church and its hypocrisy, and was also banned for 50 years by the police. His next movie was created back in Spain. Los Hordos Tierra Sin Pan, or Land Without Bread, was a documentary he was able to make by winning a lottery and borrowing a camera from Yves Allégret. The documentary was to show a part of western Spain in poverty. It was also banned in Spain.
When Francisco Franco came into power, Luis and many other artists were exiled from Spain. He then went to Hollywood, where he began dubbing dialogue for movies. In 1946, Luis went to Mexico, where he produced another movie called El Ángel Exterminador. At the end of the movie, there's a flock of sheep being led into the church, accompanied by the sound of gunshots. This represents the parishioners that go to church. After that, he travels back to France. Here he creates some of his best-known movies. In his entire career, Luis produced over 30 movies. Luis was a huge contributor to the Surrealist movement, and he shows it in his films. The Surrealist movement was a cultural movement back in the early 1920s. Surrealism is essentially to show disturbing or uncomfortable images, which project ideas or thoughts. An example of this is in his first film, where a man's hand has a hole in it and ants are crawling out. Luis was famously known as an atheist. He once said, "Thank God I'm an atheist," but this created a lot of controversy. Luis's directing technique is giving the actors little to no direction. He does this so the actors can act more naturally and logically when they're doing their scenes. Though it was frustrating for the actors at first, this technique created many fresh performances. When he was 80 years old, he made a documentary about himself called My Last Sigh. He died of old age 3 years later in Mexico City in 1983. Luis Bunuel's directing technique is still used by many directors today. Many of his movies are still watched, and he is considered one of the most influential and inspiring Spanish directors to date. We hope you have enjoyed this movie.